Kady, over to yourself first. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, and then Sarah, if you can give me a thumbs up if it's okay. Perfect. The hard part about going last is you've heard all of the other presentations, and so now my wheels are turning about so many different things, but I'll try to get back into our specific presentation and be somewhat concise. So yes, my name is Kady Seguin. I'm the Policy and Research Director at Impact, and I'm joined today by my colleague Derra, who is in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, and has been leading our work there in Burkina. So I'll be making the presentation, and Derra will chime in as well at different points, and also help me to answer any questions that he is much better placed at answering. So today we're going to talk a little bit about our work in Burkina Faso. I'll just do a quick introduction of our organization for those who aren't familiar with it. We're a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to transform how natural resources are managed in areas where security and human rights are at risk. So we're primarily working in a number of different countries across West, Eastern, and Southern Africa. And we work on a number of different mineral supply chains and across different thematic areas that are quite challenging. And so this is what has brought us to our work in Burkina Faso. And I'll describe a little bit about the artisanal and small scale gold sector in Burkina, especially for those who might not be quite as familiar with the ASM sector or within the country specifically. So most of the small scale sector in Burkina is operating informally within the country, but it's a very significant, very critical sector, especially with respect to local economies. So we have a large number of direct beneficiaries that are working directly in the sector, but also indirect beneficiaries that are working within other, sectors that support the ASM sector. So it's a very important source of livelihood. It's often poverty driven. So many of the people that have entered into artisanal and small scale gold mining in the country have done so as a result of different forms of crisis. So potentially, those who might have been internally displaced within the country due to conflict or other reasons, those facing food insecurity or in response to different natural disasters, droughts, that sort of thing. And in the areas where we're working, it's usually the most lucrative source of income. But it's rarely the only one. So oftentimes miners are also engaged in other types of income generating activities. So things like agriculture, livestock raising, that sort of thing. There is some political, instability and conflict across parts of the country, which is consistent with other neighboring countries in West Africa that have seen a deteriorating security situation, unfortunately, over the past years. And there are some increasing concerns about the presence of jihadi groups and other armed groups in different parts of the country, possibly looking to capitalize on the gold trade in particular as a source of financing. A lot of the mining is taking place in remote areas, so quite far from some of the city centers or larger towns. And this often limits the access that this sector has to a number of different services, including the finance sector. And this is something that we'll be talking about quite specifically today. The sector is very reliant on informal sources of financing. So for those who don't have an in-depth understanding of artisanal mining and gold mining, the way that the sector operates is on a pre-financing model. So there's money that's invested from further down the chain through the different actors in the supply chain. So you have your exporters, your traders, your miners. And so that money kind of flows down the chain to help support financially, that mining. So whether that's support to secure some different equipment to be able to do the mining, or to just meet some basic needs, while miners are engaged in that activity. And then that money gets paid back to, the individuals that have invested, sometimes in sort of a percentage of the gold that is then produced. And of course, with the informality that is present in the sector, this does bring about, concerns or risks of illicit forms of gold trade, or links to, different sort of nefarious activities like money laundering or other linkages to criminal network groups. So try my slide here. So it's with that context in mind that we have been working in the sector. We started working in Burkina in 2021, and it was with our project called the Foundations for Peace project. And this is a project that has three essential pillars within the project. So the first is looking at financial inclusion through what's called our AFICOD model. And I'll explain that in greater detail in a moment. But this is essentially a project to support greater financial inclusion within artisanal gold mining communities. The second is to incentivize responsible and legal artisanal gold trade, remembering that a lot of it is informal or operating outside of legal paths. And the third is to improve enforcement strategies to tackle the more nefarious aspects of illicit gold trade within the country. Now, there's three pillars, but we view these three things as very, very interlinked. And sometimes that's not quite as obvious or evident for a lot of external stakeholders. So I wanted to just unpack this a little bit more. And we look at it as a bit of a cycle of reliance that a lot of actors within artisanal gold mining chains, miners and traders and experts in particular, have on informal types of financing. And so if you think about, the fact that for a lot of miners and a lot of traders, the cost of actually formalizing, or the ease with which they can formalize, if they even have that opportunity, is very high. So, you have to pay for permits or licenses. You have to pay the costs of often traveling, far distances to get to a government office that could actually provide these services. You have to pay taxes and fees within your transactions. And so the cost of these for a sector that's quite poverty driven, is very high and doesn't really incentivize many to formalize. And so when miners or traders are not formalized, they then can't access formal sources of financing because they're not a legal entity. They're not engaging in a formal activity. And so they're reliant on informal sources of financing or black market sources of financing to be able to carry out their activities. That then ties their gold to those same channels because they need to, pay back the sources of that financing. And the interaction that those actors have with informal sources of financing often serves as a red flag for more mainstream buyers or possibly other sources of formal financing who are uncomfortable with the level of risk that might bring to them in terms of possible links to more nefarious actors. And so that kind of red flags those actors from being able to access those formal sources, which then, of course, reinforces that same reliance on the informal financing. And so this is a pretty common challenge that has been identified within artisanal and small-scale gold mining. And so there's been a lot of efforts to break this cycle, to try to introduce formal financing to the sector, but it's been quite difficult because you have a lot of structures, financing structures that have been recommended or that have been suggested in terms of microfinancing or commercial loans or government-backed, programs, private equity schemes, a number of different tools. However, those vehicles are not always compatible with the realities for a lot of artisanal gold miners in Burkina Faso, and I would say across a lot of different African countries as well. And if you look at my little graph here, you can see that the average, person, man or woman in Burkina Faso, let alone those from artisanal gold mining companies, the majority have never taken out any kind of formal, finance product. Many of them don't even have a bank account. And so they're quite far away from being able to access these types of services. And so this is what, how enters our AFICOD model that I mentioned as our first pillar of our project in Burkina Faso. And this is a model that we created and piloted first in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then have now had the opportunity to implement it in Burkina. And what it is it's essentially a village savings and loans association model, which is a very well-established model and has been used quite often, but more in sort of agricultural contexts or other sectors. But we adapted it to the artisanal and small-scale gold mining sector. And it's really seen as the first stepping stone to financial inclusion for actors who really have not had any engagement in formal types of finance. And the model pursues a women's economic empowerment approach. So it really promotes, the leadership of women within these associations as part of the management committee or as part of the volunteers that participate in this type of project. And it's really tailored to the parts of artisanal and small-scale gold mining that are really the least formalized. And so it's really, it really creates a good stepping stone also for future efforts to formalize, because it helps to start give a bit of organizational structure to the groups that participate in the project. It's also a model that promotes social cohesion within artisanal and small-scale gold mining communities, which is incredibly important in contexts like Burkina or like the Democratic Republic of Congo that are experiencing conflict, to different degrees, because it supports conflict prevention efforts that go hand in hand with social cohesion, as well as economic security that these types of programs can help to instill. So I'm not going to go into each step of how the model works. I'll share a link to a brochure that goes more into detail of the steps. But in a nutshell, the project facilitates groups within the community to just self-select and pool their savings over a period of time, and to use those savings to loan out money to members to invest in different activities. And then the profits from those investments gets put back into the pool. And so they can kind of continue to increase their savings while also supporting each other in different economic pursuits. And so I'll turn to Derra now, who can talk a little bit more about the specific results that we had in the project for Burkina.
Okay, Kady, thanks very much. Thanks also all the proactive team running the program. As you can see, we are not lucky like Paul and George sharing the same office. We are a bit far, but we share the same commitment. We have the same passion. So Kady and I are very close on this program, and all impact team is really happy, very passionate while sharing the results about AFCO program in Burkina Faso. As already mentioned, we just used the Vesla system. We decided to implement in the artisan and small scale gold mining area. And at the end of the day, we had some outlier results I can share with you. The first point is that we were able to establish more than 54 VESLAS groups and involving more than 1,300 members with more than 80% ladies, women, I mean. So at the end of the day, we were able to have participants better educated in terms of financial education. They were able to create their loans, generate it, and afford. They created the savings and they generate the loans from their own savings. It means a very system which is very simple, very accessible for these artisanal skill miners. And also it was a point from where they were able to build more solidarity in the community, because it's not money coming from outside, their own money, they were able to handle it. And at the end, they were able to use and finance some very community activities. For example, in one of the community, which is the Central West, they were able to use their own funds to finance the health care materials which were missing in their communities. It shows how they were able to identify their own needs and use the funds to reallocate it. And in another region, which is Central North, they decided to use part of their funds to make more environmental, to approach to bring more environmental solutions, like having trees in their regions. So I think while we want to speak about environmental issues, they will be more aware since they decided to identify it from their own way. So we can go to the next slide where we can share more lessons based on these projects in terms of highlights. Kady, we go to the next slide, please, as we are sharing your, yeah. So based on the lessons we shared from the project, is that formalization need to be very, very related to financial inclusion. There is most of unsuccessful efforts because there is not a link. People are not taking in consideration how it is important to link the financial inclusion and the formalization. And based on this project, we have this lesson we learned. There is no option to find a definitive solution for formalization unless we include the financial inclusion, because those providing the funds are on better position to also influence the regulations. And unfortunately, up to now, those having these formal finances are out of the system for many reasons. But for me, it sounds like a kind of garden where we don't want to provide water, but we want to decide on the quality of the tree, the quality of the flowers. So financial inclusion is very, very important to be taken in the process of formalization. A second point we can also keep in mind is the degree of formalization requires corresponding financial interventions. Because sometimes when we speak about financial inclusion, people take it holistically, but we have different steps in the process. For example, our communities, where most of them were having very minimum needs in terms of finances to start their activities or to make more activities. Some people were in need like $100, $200. So at the bottom level, we also need to take in consideration it is not the same needs according to the level of the process we want to support and find this financial solution. One more lesson from the project is that formalization is not synonymous to trade, because we see some actors who make the effort to have the first step in the legal process, like just having a license, which is not sufficient. In case they have the license, the level of the operations management becomes also another need in terms of finances. So sometimes you will see some actors, they make the first step having the license, but they cannot have formal finance to operate And definitely, as already mentioned by Kady, they will be in the reliance of the informal finances. So at the end of the day, they will be still in the same mechanism of being illegal actors. So all in all, we can say the approaches which have been tried so far are not adapted to artisanal scale miners. And we strongly believe by AFCOM model with the vessel system, it's a solution. It's already a beginning as in terms of action from the miners who are willing to take their responsibility. They make the first step by showing they are able to handle finances properly, and any second level where we will be in contact with the formal finances, they will be able to manage it as well. So this is very few words I could share regarding the program, and I hope you didn't suffer very much. Okay, so in case there are some questions, I think Kady and I will bring some clarifications, and the references regarding the report will be shared as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Derra and Kady. That was absolutely fantastic. Round of applause from everybody to you to say thank you. Absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. And I think with regards to that, there have been lots and lots of comments flying around behind the scenes saying that, actually building on the previous talk where Paul and George were saying, well, what's the problem? This actually is where what it feels like you guys have done is really put your finger on one of those key problems, which, if not checked, can turn into that vicious cycle where it's complicated, but also really difficult for people to break out of this. So this is absolutely fantastic. And thank you very much for sharing.